Okay, this video is going to be about conditional statements in JavaScript. Okay, we've been talking about Boolean expressions, comparisons, which result in Boolean values. Conditionals allow you to use those Boolean expressions to conditionally perform some action. Okay, so just to recap, conditionals have to do with Boolean primitives, true or false. Okay, we have the if statement. This is the conditional statement. It's an if. It's a JavaScript statement taking an expression that conditionally executes code if that expression evaluates to Boolean true. And here's the structure. If, parentheses, insert your Boolean expression in parentheses, and then curly brace denotes the beginning of your code block, and then end curly brace is the end of your code block. Okay, so I've created this file, conditionals.js. Alright, and I'm going to run it with node conditionals. Okay, there's our primitives, and here's the structure of what it looks like. Okay, let's try something really basic here. We'll create a variable with a score, like a test score, and we're going to say if the score is greater than or equal to 60, you passed, and if the score is less than 60, you failed. Okay, so we've got the score at 75.2 now. We run the code. 75.2 gets stored in this variable. The var keyword tells JavaScript we're creating a variable, score, and we're setting that equal with the assignment operator. It's a single equal sign. On the right hand side of the assignment operator we have the score 75.2. So that gets stored in memory, and score points to that memory location. The if statement takes this Boolean expression, if score is greater than or equal to 60. JavaScript reads this if statement, takes this expression, and tries to boil it down to one value. Score is a variable, so it looks in memory at the memory location, storing the value. That value we know from up here is 75.2. So is 75.2 greater than or equal to 60? That's true, so this block of code, and there can be any number of lines in here. I can put 3 lines in there, or 3,000. Since this Boolean expression evaluates to true, this code block executes. And we have a second if statement. If, parentheses, score is less than 60. You failed. Alright. Score, JavaScript tries to evaluate this expression. It looks at score. Okay, that's a variable. It's pointing to a memory location. That memory location is storing a value. What's that value? That value is 75.2. If 75.2 is less than 60, print this. Well, it's not. This is false. So that code branch is skipped. Okay, so we can test this with a score of 55. Okay. Now, if in the code between these two if statements, if I change score, so here's score is a 92.3, and then I change score to be a 55, both of these will evaluate to true. It's because JavaScript executes one line at a time. Here, the value stored in score points to a memory location storing this value. Once I assign it a new value, when we get to this code block, it looks at score and it's pointing to a new memory location with a new value in it. We changed what score was referencing with the assignment operator here. And notice we didn't declare the variable again. We don't do this. We have var score. Once you've declared it with var, you only do that one time. From then on, you just reference the variable by name. Okay. So technically, you could do var score and then from then on do all of your assignments with just the variable name. But this is a shortcut. Var score equals 92.3. Okay. So since we changed score here, both of these lines should print. Okay. Alright, we'll change it back to what it was. Okay, so this is just pass-fail, right? So let's look at how we could code getting a letter grade. So let's say if you have above 90, you get an A, above 80, but below 90, you get a B. You know, the normal grading scale. So let's take a look at this code and break it down. So we'll set score to 88.4. And we do multiple if statements. Okay, if score is greater than 90, greater than or equal to 90, you get an A. If it's greater than or equal to 80, you get a B. Greater than or equal to 70, C. Greater than or equal to 60, D. Less than 60, fail. Alright, what do you think will happen here? This first one, it's going to look in score, look in memory for the value. The value is 88.4. Is that greater than or equal to 90? No. So it will not execute this. Now it's going to look at score. Is score greater than or equal to 80? Yes. So it should execute. You got a B. The problem comes in here. We have if score is greater than or equal to 70. Well, 88 is greater than or equal to 70. So it's going to print this one too, and this one. So that's a problem. This isn't quite what we want. But we're just using what we know so far with the if statements. Okay. So this is not quite right. What else do we need? So there's an else statement. The else statement must be used in conjunction with the if statement. The else statement is a JavaScript statement that must be used in conjunction with the if statement. The code in the if block is executed if the expression evaluates to true. Otherwise, the code in the else block is executed. Alright, so if this expression equals true, this code gets executed. If you have an else statement, if the if is false, what gets executed? The code block in the else statement. And it's very simple. It's just else. There's no parentheses, no expression, just else, the keyword else, and then curly brackets. Curly brackets denote the beginning of a code block. So we have if expression, curly brackets, which means a code block, else, curly brackets, code block. Okay. So this example is similar to what we did up here with the first one. If the score is greater than or equal to 60, you pass, but instead of this second if, we just say else, because anything else is fail. Anything below 60. Let's see, this is greater than or equal to, which includes 60. So 60 and above is going to be an A, or a pass. This is less than 60. Okay, but if I just say else, that automatically means anything less than 60. Okay. says you pass. Now we can do 50. Now we run it. Failed. So you see that works. Alright. This still isn't enough to do our letter grade situation. So there is one more statement that's a combination of the two we've just learned, the else-if statement. It's a JavaScript statement that must be used in conjunction with the if statement. The code in the if block is executed if the expression evaluates to true, otherwise the expression in the else-if statement is checked. If true, the else-if block is executed. So you can use any number of these else-if statements after an initial if statement. So here's the structure. Here's your initial if statement. If, parenthesis, expression, curly brace is your code block. So if this is false, it's going to come down here to the else statement, but it's an else if. So it's going to check the expression. If this is true, then this code block gets executed. And you can tag any number of else ifs, and then you can have an else at the very end if you want. So what we have here is we're going to use our score variable again. So we have if score is greater than or equal to 90, execute this code block. Else. So this only gets executed if the first if is false. Up here, all of these get executed. It checks all of these if statements. Even if this one's false, this is a new if statement, and so it's going to check this one. So even if this is false, this is a new if statement, so it'll check this one. The thing about else is none of these else's will be checked if the if is true. Same with this first else if. If this one is true, none of the rest of these else if expressions will even be checked. There'll be no need to, because this was true. Okay, so that's the way JavaScript executes the conditional branch. It starts with an if. If it's false, it checks for an else if. An else or an else if. If there's an else if, it checks that one. And then it repeats. It keeps repeating. Okay, until it finally gets an else or there's no more. Okay, so it's if, else if, any number of those, and then an else. Okay, so this is a B, so it should say you got a B. Okay, again, we set score equal to 88.4. This is a literal. So JavaScript reads this line. It creates a new memory location and stores this value in it. Score holds that memory location. Here, this is a JavaScript expression. It looks up score, looks up the memory location, and looks up the data inside. The data inside is 88.4. If 88.4 is greater than or equal to 90, this gets executed. It's not, so it skips on to the next. Sees an else if. Is 88.4 greater than or equal to 80? Yes, it is. So it executes this code block and it's done. It skips over all the rest of the else ifs. None of these get executed. None of them are even read by JavaScript. It just skips them. Okay. So we talked about previously all of the Boolean expressions, the Boolean operators and comparison operators. Any of those Boolean expressions are valid for the if statement. And you can also use a variable holding a Boolean. So if I wanted var got a B, alright, let's call it has B, I can set this variable equal to score greater than or equal to 80. Then I can just reference if has B. Oops. Has B. Okay. A variable by itself is a JavaScript expression. Okay. Has B. Well, let's back up here. We defined a variable has B. We use the assignment operator. So the assignment operator is going to take everything on the right hand side of the equals and it's going to boil it down to a single value. Okay? So it sees score, it looks that up in memory, it does the comparison, it gets a value true or false, and then it stores it in has-be's memory location. Then when I say if has-be, this has already been calculated and stored. So now it's just I'm just looking it up in memory. I'm not evaluating the expression here. That was done up here by JavaScript. Okay, so if has-be, okay, and you can do this with strings as well. So if I have a password up here and I type what's the password, and if they guess the password, say sandwich was the correct answer, then you get the password. That's correct. This block of code will execute. If you do not get the password, it says no dice. Okay. Now this will work better when we go into user input, where you type in some values and then you can have a program that you try to guess the password and you type it in and it'll tell you if you got it or not. So right now, since we're coding in a string literal, this isn't as fun as it would be if we could get user input, and we'll do that later. Okay, so we run this. We stored pickles as the password. So here's our Boolean expression. We have if statement, parentheses, Boolean expression, parentheses, and then code block. So it's going to check password, look up in memory what value is stored there. Pickles is stored there. This pickles equals sandwich. That's false. So it's going to skip this block and it should move to the else block and say no dice. Okay, yeah. Alright, if we change our password to, hang on, let me add a separator here. Okay, let's change our password to match the password, which was sandwich. So it's going to look up password in memory, and up here we stored sandwich in memory. So it's going to look up that memory location and pull down a separate string, sandwich, and compare it to this string, and those two strings are equal. So this should print. You get the password. Okay. So this is called branching logic. because as the code comes down, reads line by line by line, if this is true, it branches to this other portion. And you can have nested if statements. You can have as many as you want. Now generally it's bad practice to nest too many if statements. If you get too deep in the nesting, it becomes hard to figure out what the program's supposed to do. But a couple levels of nesting is not necessarily too bad. But JavaScript allows you to do as many as you want. You can do the JavaScript Node.js runtime allows you to execute however many number of nested ifs you'd like. I imagine there is a limit with the stack, but that's beyond the scope of this lecture. Okay, so the main thing to get is if else, and else. Okay, and the curly brackets denote code blocks. And the expression of the if statement and the else if statement goes in parentheses. And it can be as complicated of an expression as you like. I could put this in parentheses and say, and has a sandwich or something like that. I can and a bunch of other booleans, but it's a boolean expression. So the end result of whatever boils down from this JavaScript expression should be a boolean value. And if it's not, JavaScript will coerce it into one. So an empty string is considered false to JavaScript. A string with data in it is true. You got the password. If this is just any string. If there's data in the string, JavaScript says that's true. You're supposed to put a boolean value in the if statement. You didn't. JavaScript said, okay, well, I'll do my best. JavaScript says if there's data in the string, we'll call that true. That's called a truthy value. If there's no data in the string, we'll call that false. That's called falsy. Okay, so that's the basics of conditional logic, conditionals. It's very powerful. It allows you to let your program do different things given different context, given different circumstances. It'll behave differently, which is fundamental to get any program working that does anything interesting, aside from basic calculations. Okay, so that's conditionals.